Alrighty. Well, hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for coming to hear Pete Davis and Kyla Alterman be speaking about Democracy Policy Network. They're a super, super cool organization that I'm personally a huge fan of, but I'll let them explain what they do. Pete, want to take it away?
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having us. We're so glad to be here. We're always happy to talk with other folks that are excited about new ideas for ameliorating problems in the world and making, leaving behind a better world than we found it. I'm Pete Davis. I'm a progressive activist, civic advocate from Virginia. I'm here with my co-founder, Kyla. Kyla, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey all, I'm Kyla Alterman, co-founder of Deepin with Pete and some others. And I live in Philadelphia where I work on Deepin and also employee ownership consulting.
Wonderful. So we're going to talk a little bit about what Deepin is, but we want to save most of our time for questions because the most interesting stuff usually comes in the Q&A when we talk about it, but we'll give you the kind of opening spiel of what it is. So what is Deepin? Deepin stands for the Democracy Policy Network, and we are what we call an interstate policy network. Our goal is to be the back-end policy support for state legislators and statehouses across the country. So the reason Deepin started was because we started seeing that there were these new bold state legislators cropping up in state houses across the country. They were younger, they were more diverse, they were more interested in bolder policy. They were kind of fighting, they came into office fighting the establishment and being willing to kind of not just do policy the old way of what's bubbling up locally in the state house, but also kind of taking new ideas and trying to spread them. And we started noticing that this new group of state legislators were cropping up, and really exciting things were coming out of them, like prison voting and state Green New Deals and tenant unions and ranked choice voting. Like all these interesting policies were cropping up across the country. At the same time, there were, even outside of the state legislators themselves, there were just these experts and advocacy groups championing all these new ideas across the country as well. And we said something is happening here, like at policy at the state level. So when we looked into it, and this was in 2019, like coming up on 2 years ago, what we found was we were right about this feeling. Like there are really exciting policy campaigns happening at the state level, state legislators excited to champion transformative policy, but it was very, very disorganized. So the ideas were like one-off ideas in one state. The state legislatures, like who were transformative, were very alone in their state house. They didn't know about each other. So very promising energy that was disorganized. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to help organize that by being a back-end policy shop for what we call this movement in the states. So what do we mean by back-end policy shop? One is we want to we want to create policy kits for these state legislators about all these different issues that explain that gather, package, organize, and amplify these ideas. So we find out that public banking is being pushed in California. We send a policy organizer out to gather information about these policies. Then they package it into these things we call policy kits. We organize that on a site, and then we amplify it to these state legislators. And then we wanted to bring these state legislators together into a network of folks that were supporting each other and supporting these ideas in raising them up. So the eventual end goal, and I'm going to show you what this is specifically by the end, but the eventual end goal was we wanted an open agenda of transformative policies for deepening democracy across all the states. And we wanted a policy community that was excited about developing and amplifying that agenda. And so over the past few years, we started building this up. We've made inroads in like a bunch of states with a bunch of state legislators. We've brought on dozens of policy organizers. I see many of them here today. We got Michael Yang on the call, who's working on like algorithmic governance. We got Arushi on the call, who's working on cooperative policy. And we've started the process of making these kits and transferring them to legislators. And then, we've started to see some of these things pop when we've created this interstate network. So, for example, we had this wonderful organizer, Michael Brennan. He gathered, packaged, organized policy on public banks. We got that to some legislators in West Virginia, and one party in West Virginia started introducing public bank legislation. We just published a bunch of new kits. Some member of our network, Senator Robert Peters of Illinois, reached out and said, I want to learn more about one of these policies you had. We connected him with Ron Kim and Julia Salazar in New York, who had introduced it there. We brought them together through our policy kit on that one policy, public payments programs. So I wanted to kind of really show you the concrete meat of this, which was the policy kits themselves, which we're really proud of. So for example, just to show you what our policy kits are made of, this is this idea called democracy vouchers. It's an idea out of Seattle where, to solve the campaign finance reform problem, what they do in Seattle is they issue everyone a democracy voucher, like a $50 voucher that they can use to spend on candidates. And those candidates can cash them in for campaign cash, which makes the campaign fundraising part of the election as equal as the voting part of the election. And so in every kit, we have this cool illustration. Then we have an introduction that explains the problem. We have policy elements that walk through like the meat of what is going on with the problem. We have with the solution, like here, it's like everything you need to know about establishing a democracy voucher system, everything you need to know about the opt-in rules for people accepting democracy vouchers. Then we write up precedents. So like a precedent is worth 1,000 op-eds. All these legislators tell us, where is it being done before? And so we wrote up a story of Seattle's democracy vouchers program. We collect all the info on like statewide campaigns on democracy vouchers. We put together a bullpen of experts so that when the legislator wants to call someone about this idea, they have people they can call. Like here's Jonathan Stein, who did the campaign finance push in California. And then just to top it all off, we end with, if this kit is not enough, here's a reading list of all your of further reading on this issue. And so our idea is basically we want to lather, rinse, repeat this across all of the promising issues in all the states. So this is ours on democracy vouchers. This is ours on legal aid for all. This is ours on alternative voting methods like ranked choice voting, public banks, public payments platforms. And those are just the 5 we've made. We have all these, if you go to our agenda page, we have all these kits that are in the works on all these different issues. And we're really excited because we're trying to do this in like an open participatory way. Like we're not a think tank, we're a network. So we're really excited that instead of like having to raise, tens of millions of dollars to pay specific experts to write this all up, we've noticed that there's a lot of policy-minded, democratically spirited warrior nerds online that, are putting all their energy into like posting on Twitter. And we're like, hey, why don't you put some of your readerly, writerly skills to use in gathering, packaging, organizing, and amplifying policy? So we put in these open calls for policy organizers. We get a bunch of people and we put them to work in like making these kits. And what's been so exciting, this is the part that makes me like the happiest about what we do, is we get these people that never would have worked on this thing, that we just kind of give them this platform to start working on something, put it together as a kid and be useful in raising up that idea. And they wake up like 6 months later and they're like a national expert on this issue because we just kind of helped guide them through putting together some kit on this or that policy. So I guess, that's the basic shtick of what we do. And we'll kind of elucidate a lot of this in questions, but I'd love to just talk a little bit about some of the things I've learned from doing this process. So like one thing I've learned, which I just said, was there are all of these untapped policy wonks out there, volunteer citizen wonks that are ready to go deep on a policy and become someone that can be of use. We don't just need professional wonks working on this. The second thing is that there are all these ideas out there that people are that are hiding away in different corners of this country that are the positive alternative that, if done together, could really be a whole different way of doing politics. So like, there's a war on drugs going on in this country, but in Oregon, they just had a ballot initiative that decriminalized not just pot, but all drugs. In there's total horrible things going on in prisons, but in Maine, there's a prison board of visitors idea where every prison has a citizen board that is watchdogging the prisons, and they also have prison voting, which has expanded to Vermont and DC. There's a real corporatized economy, but in Colorado, they have an employee ownership commission that is totally creating the conditions to allow for cooperatives to thrive in Colorado. So our whole idea is that piecemeal across the country, the future already exists. In many cases, it exists already in the law in some states, and even if not that, it exists in really fleshed out ideas hidden in PDFs that are just waiting for an organizer to extract them and get them to the people who are ready to champion them. And then finally, the third thing I've learned, and then I'll end with that, is that these legislators, a lot of times there are issues where the fight to get an issue on the board is like interest groups fighting with each other. But a lot of times it's that the idea has just not gotten there yet, that there's a vacuum, that there's candidates running for office and they don't know what to put on their policy pages. Or the reason they're into a policy is because someone got to them first. And it's really amazing what just kind of disseminating ideas and showing them that there are ideas that connect with your ideals is really powerful. And that there still is I have this philosopher I love, Roberto Unger, who says, our ideals are nailed to the cross of our institutions, by which he means you can't just say we want a world to be like this. You have to bake your ideals into institutions. What is the place where we bake our ideals into institutions? One of the major places is policy. Policy is just another word for institutional design. And a lot of people who have shared ideals don't have the designs yet. And by gathering and packaging and disseminating those designs, we've seen a lot of exciting things spread. A precedent is worth 1,000 opinions. You have something come to one state, suddenly the neighboring state wants it, suddenly read about it in the news, and Congress wants to start fighting for it. Amazing things have started in the states, and that's what we're excited about. And we really believe in that. Kyla, did I miss anything on that? Is there any other aspect of Deepin we want to talk about before we take questions?
That was pretty all-encompassing. I guess like the two little nuggets I would add, Pete touched on this a little bit, but obviously we want to get all of these kits out to legislators, but really we're also just trying to provide a vision, a positive vision for a future that we can work towards. A lot of people now want alternatives, but can't name what those alternatives are. So this isn't just for legislators, but it is for movement groups, community groups, your friends, everyone, so they can actually see a vision to work towards in 5 years, 10 years. So that is a big thing. We're just trying to show the whole breadth of our alternative vision. And I loved, what Pete was saying was like, you just got to get to our legislators with our ideas first. And I just had someone I went to university with run for state legislature in Delaware, and they won. They beat a very long time incumbent that wasn't doing great things for her community, and she ran and won by like 10 votes or like 12 votes. But she had like one policy that she knew she really wanted to do stuff with public schools there, but otherwise she is very progressive, but was kind of an open book of like, I don't know what to fight for. I don't know what to believe. I just like have these ideals, but I don't know what to back them with. So it was great to see firsthand. I got put on her policy committee to see these young voices and active legislators who want to champion these ideas, but just don't know where to start. And I could see immediately the value when we do build up this library of policy kits. We have what, you know, her and her fellow legislators can run on, or when they get in office, they know what they can push for. So really excited about that. I think that's all I have for now.
I'll add one more story before we go to questions just along that. I'm on the Housing Commission in my local town in Falls Church, Virginia. And all the conversations are limited to the ideas that are on the shelf when we're talking about solving for affordable housing in our town. So people are like, oh, I've heard of ADUs in apartment buildings that developers build, so let's do ADUs. Or I've heard of the backyard, what are they called? Accessory dwelling units, like granny flats in the backyard, so let's do that. But then, you know, someone sends out, and that's like the whole conversation for a year. And then someone sends out a link about, you know, fighting Minneapolis's inclusive zoning legislation, ending single family zoning in Minneapolis. And then suddenly the whole conversation opens up, like the idea, everyone on the commission wants more affordable housing, but that idea kicked open a door. And then I was working on Deepin, and someone made a community land trust kit, and everyone was talking about, oh, how do we, like, if only the market deals with housing, we'll never be able to keep it affordable, so we're always fighting this, that, or the other. And I was like, oh, what about community land trust? Oh, that's not possible. That sounds like hippie stuff. What do we do? Well, did you know in Champaign, Vermont, there's over hundreds of houses inside of a community land trust there. In Madison, Wisconsin, there's a huge community land trust there. So seeing that another world is possible through the ideas, not just through the ideals, is kind of part of Deepin's theory of change. Everything is important, but that's the role we play. So let's open it up to questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Pete and Kyla. That was fantastic. And yeah, so excited to be able to ask some questions. So we have got some questions in the chat. I'll just read them out to you guys. So first up, are there similar groups on other parts of the ideological spectrum? And if so, do you guys look to them for organizational insights?
Yep. In 2019, we started this with a lot of research. Like, we basically had a year of just interviewing people about how, like, the world of, it's kind of funny. You find yourself in, what is the field you're in? The field I'm in is interstate policy networks, which is, there's actually a whole history of this. And so the most famous interstate policy network is ALEC, which is the right-wing libertarian kind of corporatist interstate policy network. And that has been around, I believe, since the 70s. And it basically creates model legislation through a centralized entity and disseminates it out to a network of legislators. So if you ever see in the news, you know, there were 17 states that on the same day initiated kind of abortion restrictions or something, or this way of kind of ending the ability to do municipal internet. It's probably ALEC that's behind that. There's been this ALEC of the left push for many decades that has had many iterations. We actually talked to the first iteration ever, which was called CLASP. It was the Council on Local and State, Alternative Local and State Policy. Lee Webb out of Vermont, who was doing so many good policies out of Vermont, and he kept getting phone calls of like, we want your policy you did in Vermont. We want your policy you did in Vermont. That he said, like, F it, let me just start an organization to disseminate policy to everyone. And that has kind of evolved. There's been like the State Policy Network. There's been this thing called ALICE, which was like the first official ALEC of the left. And then the current iteration is called the State Innovation Exchange, or SIX. And that's more centrist, kind of center of the Democratic Party usually. And where we see ourselves, we kind of have two things. One is we don't just want to do consensus Democratic Party policy. We really want to do like vanguard cutting edge policy. And the second thing is we want to be much more open. So SIX is like, as a legislator, it's all written by their experts. They have, like, they get approved by the constituent groups of the Democratic Party. It's behind a private login for legislators. we are like, an ALEC is like you actually pay to be the one, like corporations pay into ALEC to get their bills disseminated. It's like very corrupt. With us, we just want to be a fully open entity made by volunteers, that anyone can see, journalists, activists, legislators. We have an editorial process to keep the information accurate and connected to our ideology, but it's very kind of much more open than any of these attempts in the past.
Yeah, just to add on with that ideology, we're constantly looking, does this idea bring more power to more people in more ways? Are we deepening democracy? So that's always what we are looking to. And while most of our policies you may be able to place on a side of the ideological spectrum, actually a lot of these ideas can be supported by people of any party. And like an example, public banks or cooperatives or worker ownership actually has a lot of bipartisan support. So, I think we are really passionate about these ideas being open for all to take up and use, which is, I think, a little different as well.
Yeah, thank you guys. Can you speak more to the conditions that some state legislators are working under, for example, working part-time with minimal staff, and how that affects what policies get made?
Oh my gosh, yes. Okay, this is such a huge problem that we have a policy kit about it. So I will tell you. So there's some state legislatures that have like semi-adequate staffing, but it's very few and far between. Most state legislators, they're part-time. They have to have another day job. They're paid so little that they can't focus their full time on this. Both part-time in the amount they're paid and part-time in like the literal schedule of doing this. Texas, it's like once every 2 years they have a session. And then they're totally understaffed. And a lot of the knowledge, the like ecosystem of knowledge is like housed in the speaker's office, who has like a bunch of staff. And like knowledge really is power in a legislature. So like you have to have a staffer that just keeps you from like the stream of legislation coming in. So like I have to vote on 100 things in a quick time period. So like most of your staff time is like, what are my yes or no votes on all this? If you want to do your yes or no votes, do constituent services, be there at events around your district, move up and like interact with the speaker, just get basic information on like the normal legislation being pushed, keep up with your committee. If you want to push a cutting edge policy and be the one who informs people about that, you're like out of staff and you're out of time. That is one of the reasons we definitely need a back end policy system. A lot of lobbyists, like corporate lobbyists, when they're training, like in their internal documents, when they're like training new corporate lobbyists, they will openly state, our power is not necessarily, you think it's that we're slipping the money like through campaign donations. It's often not just that, like sometimes the money might help, but it's often that they control the informational ecosystem. We have this interview with Vaughn Stewart, this wonderful legislator in Maryland. He told me anytime there's an issue coming up, the corporate lobbyist has like a 15-page document with glossy images with a bunch of professors that support it. And the grassroots group are like threw together a page at the last minute. And so it's all about the information ecosystem and about the bandwidth of the legislature. So that is one of the reasons we need a back end policy shop. And a lot of times with ALEC, like it was not just the money corruption of campaign finance. It was that they churned out info after info, argument after argument. The founder of ALEC said, my goal is I want my legislators in ALEC to be the smartest, most well-informed legislators, so they sound like the utterly reasonable ones. We need, if we want to make these ideas champion like vanguard cutting edge ideas, we need to have people informed enough so they sound like the utterly reasonable ones too, because we believe they are the utterly reasonable ones, but you need information to do that. And information is production that requires labor, and that takes time and bandwidth and staff time and energy, and that's one thing we're trying to do with this.
Next question. What do you think are the most neglected policy areas that you need more kits for?
I will show you on here. We actually have we actually literally have a list of our target kits. So I will give a very concrete answer and then a more abstract one. If you go to the bottom of our agenda page, you can see all the kits that are being worked on and all the kits that those are listed under as coming soon, and all the kits that we don't have contributors for. We're not limited to what's just on the target page. Like if you have an idea of a cool thing that fits the spirit, we'll add it. We add things all the time. But like that's our concrete answer is we have a bunch of, and you can also click around this way, which is our like framework that if someone has a question about this, I don't want to bore you now, but we have a whole framework of how we organize all the elements and how it fits into our spirit of deepening democracy. You can kind of click around into strong communities and then see what kits are being worked on or have been done or haven't been made yet. So that's the concrete answer. The abstract answer is, I think there's really interesting things in a bunch of areas that are not getting play in the mainstream parties yet and have really interesting ideas. So one is democratizing the economy, things like public banks and worker cooperatives and tenant unions, labor power, antitrust, really interesting political economy stuff you can do at the state level. The other one is prison reform kind of has hit a plateau in the mainstream where basically we got the whole country on board with nonviolent drug offenders should not be in prison or something. But if you actually looked at the numbers, as many of you probably know, nonviolent drug offenders are a very small portion of mass incarceration. And so pushing past that low plateau towards real mass decarceration, changing parole, changing sentence length, really drastically changing who gets incarcerated and like different levels before incarceration. That is, expanding the abolishment of the war on drugs beyond pot. That's a huge thing. And then the third I'd say that we love at Deepin is we love democratic forms. So anything that increases participation, not just a technocratic solution to something, but actually something that opens up institutions to the participation of more people. So we're very interested in, when you have a policy you're trying to achieve, creating like ways to bring people in. So like Green New Deal, we want in our Green New Deal kit, climate mobilization councils. So that in every local area, there's people getting involved in implementing the Green New Deal, just how like we had war mobilization councils in World War II. We're interested in neighborhood councils. We're interested in participatory budgeting. One interesting thing in open government is we're really interested in this new idea called citizen news vouchers, where you give every citizen a voucher that they can spend on local journalism to repopulate local journalism. We call these generative policies because they're policies that don't just achieve the original end, they create the conditions of achieving other ends as well. So when you create things that get people more empowered, that will generate more ideas that will allow you to pass other things as well. So we're very excited by things like that.
And just to add on to that a bit, right now, the way that we've been building these kits, volunteers come and based on their interests, we place them in a kit that, we want to work on as well that fits their interests. And, somehow how that goes, people will come and be like, oh, well, I'm interested in, and there's always, maybe the same 5 things, like people really want to do housing or healthcare or environment, and have like maybe a big bucket of interest. And then we try to kind of dig deeper and then take our if you look on our site, all of those different kits, we kind of try to pair people with something that maybe they wouldn't have thought of before. So that's kind of how we deal with the issue of if there's a kit that like no one has shouted out that they want to do, we are trying to pair people with like interests in their skills with our ideas. And really the only barrier right now is just having more time and bandwidth to bring on more volunteers to start filling out more and more kits. So that's our growth point right now, is just being able to bring in more and more volunteers.
So the next question is from Michael. Sorry to out you, Michael. But one trend in, Michael Yang. There's two Michaels here. One trend in US politics is the nationalization of party and issues. That means that many ideas like the Green New Deal are objectionable just because some of their strongest supporters are from liberal urban cities. Since DPN works at the state level, how do we get around these issues? And is it possible for local politics to avoid the nationalizing trend?
I love this question. One of my favorite counterintuitive points I heard from someone once was that they were saying basically, oh, the conventional wisdom is that we all agree on values, but we disagree on how to enact them in concrete ways. And that's the problem of politics. We all believe in X, but we disagree on how to make it happen. And he said, no, that's totally wrong. We all disagree on first principles, but we can come together on specific overlapping concrete projects that might serve multiple first principles. And so it's not a philosophy class of getting everyone's first principles in order. It's like a practical question of getting multiple coalitions of people with wildly different first principles working on things together. And I love that point because it dovetails nicely with what we're doing, because what we're trying to do is we have an ideology. We talk about democracy. We have a really thick understanding of what democracy means. So if people love and share our ideology and our first principles of this, it's nothing against philosophy classes, by the way. I'll say that. I love philosophy classes. We're only in this because of philosophy classes. If you're into our ideology, we have like a whole way to do that. But the way we do it concretely is we make a bunch of one-off policies that you can come in, take our kit, and disagree with everything else. And when we do interaction with real state legislators, a lot of them share our vision, but they sometimes have used our kits with people who don't share our vision because the kits are really concretely about issue by issue specifics. I'd like to tell one more story about issue by issue specifics, and then I'll get into the exact question. Issue by issue specifics. Kyla was totally right. I just want to echo it on like this messes with the left-right spectrum. So democracy vouchers, this idea I love out of Seattle to make campaign finance much less corrupt and much more equal. I'm in blue trifecta state, Virginia, all Democratic controlled. I've tried to push democracy vouchers in Virginia. I'm told it's too radical. You should try Vermont or California or something. There is actually one state, like in Seattle, an example, like a more lefty city. There's actually one state where the citizens voted on democracy vouchers, and it is South Dakota. And the ballot initiative on democracy vouchers, the thing called too radical for blue trifecta Virginia, passed 52-48. The only reason democracy vouchers were not implemented in South Dakota was because the governor issued an emergency declaration to declare that the state was at existential risk if the ballot initiative went through, which is the only way they could overturn a ballot initiative. So they were so scared of democracy that they said it was an existential threat to the state of South Dakota to implement the public will of the people of South Dakota. So the only public bank right now is in North Dakota, and we've had all of our success in pushing public banks in deep red West Virginia. So there is, when you get concrete, amazing things happen that break through. Final thing, what about these names? So we are calling our state Green New Deal it to inspire our organizers who are excited about making a state Green New Deal kit. But probably when we send it out to legislators, we might change the name because it's exactly what you said, Michael. There are studies where as soon as something, y'all all know this, but as soon as something gets polarized nationally, it's a lost cause of getting people working on concrete things together. So we try to name things and talk about things in ways that can speak to kind of the brass tacks of the simple thing. It is a challenge, though, because we want to show people, we want it to be something that can talk to everyone, but we also want to show the more cutting edge groups, bolder groups, that this is actually worth it. So we have this tension between like making it boring, but also making it exciting. And we try to navigate that tension with every single kit.
Okay, next question from the other Michael. How do you plan to provide support for those who introduce your legislation to build support within state legislatures?
Very quickly, you know, when a legislature wants to be a champion of one of our kits, we're there to kind of connect them with experts, give them a briefing, answer FAQ questions for them, write op-eds with them, write these things called Dear Colleague letters, which is like the letter where a legislator makes a case to other legislators to vote for something. We will do that, basically. We won't we draw the line just for bandwidth purposes at like, we don't run full statewide grassroots campaigns for our kits. Like, we're not big enough for that. But if someone wants to champion, we'll double down on the like intellectual idea back end of helping you out. A lot of writing usually. Kyla, anything to add on that? Or
no, that's a perfect answer. I think that's another like long-term growth edge for us is figuring out, you know, we might have a 501c4 and figuring out like how do we actually follow these campaigns beyond with our state legislators. But at this point, we just don't have the capacity. But yeah.
So the next two questions are sort of similar, but two people basically asked if you guys are interested or planning to do kits on farmed animal rights issues, and then another person asked about sort of stuff that's more foreign policy related, like global anti-poverty programs or global human development.
On farm animal, we have an industrial ag kit that's being worked on right now. On reforming industrial ag, and on specific farm animal welfare, we might spin off and do a specific kit on that too. We are totally open to that. That falls within, we don't have anyone actively working specifically on farm animal welfare, but that totally falls within our umbrella of the type of kit we would do. So if anyone's interested in that, please volunteer and be our policy organizer for that, which is one of my joys of working on this. We always have an ask for anyone who's interested in plugging in. There's always something to do with us. So I first thought we would have no foreign policy kits when I first started Deepin. But I've discovered over time, as we've looked into it, there is a lot a state can do on a foreign policy level. And if we're willing to push past like what's been done already, there's just a lot we can conceptually do. And so like states have specific contracts with other countries. States do sister city programs. States, a state could conceptually do foreign aid if it wanted to, I believe. And so that is something we are very open to, and both on looking at, states are very involved in global trade deals, especially if like an industry is implicated in a global trade deal. We talked to Lori Wallach of Public Citizens Global Trade Watch, and she said there's a lot of like coalitions of governors that do things on global trade. So we don't have any active kits on that, but we are very open to that as well.
Yeah, I feel like we talked about just having someone work on a kit that's even just describing what a state can do related to foreign policy.
Yeah,
because I don't know if there's even something, I don't know if there's any document that compiles all of the different things a state can do.
But Bernie Sanders famously turned Burlington into like a foreign policy shop when he was mayor. And he went on trips to St. Petersburg as a delegation of the city of Burlington. So, if he could do it for a city, we can do it for states too.
Awesome. So the next question, actually, do you know if local officials, I'm guessing this question is about cities, are also using your kits? Yeah, like how can Deepin work with cities?
We have in our network, like the center of gravity of our network is state legislators. So that's who we write to. But all of our kits are open, they're just publicly online. People can get them. And we've been contacted by people doing local campaigns. So my favorite one is the city of Austin got democracy vouchers on the ballot and partially informed by our kit. And so when we write the kits, just to keep the entity stable and not like diluted into like effectiveness, we're going to just focus in. We write them directed at states, but and like what a state can do, but a lot of times that's like 10% at the end. Like 90% of the kit is just explaining what tenant unions are and how you can support them, and then the final 10% is what can states do to do that. So if someone wanted to run for mayor on it, they just kind of lop off the last 10% and put in like a city specific thing. And so we also do a lot of what states can do to legalize cities to do things too. So there's a lot of municipal use as well.
Awesome. So another question, which I can maybe also, I have some insight on this, but so question is, isn't there a ton of legalese involved in writing policy? How are volunteers trained to prepare these kits?
For our volunteers on the call, do you want to answer? So,
well, I guess like for me, I mean, you guys did like a great job kind of telling us like what kind of goes into writing these kits, and like just a lot of it is just talking to experts, like people who know more than us, which is a lot of people. Like I'm working on a worker cooperative kit in which I knew a little bit about the topic, but definitely not an expert by any means, and have just learned like a ton from talking to people who are experts in the field. And yeah. Yeah.
Well, can I just jump in? I see a question just came in of, do we draft model legislation, which kind of fits into this, like, does it involve a lot of legalese? And we are writing policy kits that kind of explain the issue, give you solutions, but we do not have the exact legislation that you would need to pass. We don't have like boilerplate legislation. That's something we've had volunteers express interest in figuring out how to do. That's something that, you know, if a legislator comes to us and says, I want to pass this now, we could try to help find someone to write the legislation with them. But right now we are not writing the actual legislation. So volunteers don't need to know that legalese or how to model that legislation. It's all about, you know, gathering the ideas out there, as Arushi said, talking to those experts, getting the ideas, distilling that information, writing it in a useful format, and then writing those exact elements that are explaining what to do, but it's not the actual legislation to do it. So.
And this is a misconception about like what's standing in the way of policy. You know, there's not a, you know, people, there's a message out there that's like normal people, ordinary citizens should not be involved in policy. But one of our beliefs is like, it's not that many clicks away from figuring out how things should be done by talking to a few people. And we can't let the lawyers and the economists run everything. You know, you know, you can think about, you know, there, some of these policies, you know, it's as simple as, you know, sometimes an organizer will come to me and be like, yeah, why don't prisoners have phones or something? Like, why do we even charge for phones? Like, couldn't you have a nonprofit phone service? Or why don't we just let them have cell phones that are limited to specific things? And I sometimes go, well, go look for precedents. That person went away and said, oh, it turns out in Scotland, they just let everyone have cell phones in their cells. It's been done before. Or like, why can't we just have an office of restorative justice or employee ownership? I'm like, oh, go check if it's done somewhere. Oh, it's done somewhere. That's great. So, you know, your ideas of how something could be different might be validated by precedents out there in history, around the world, in the country, some professor that's already thought about it. And on this concrete thing about drafting, a lot of legislators have drafting offices. They're not like, I want to pass this policy, but we haven't found a lawyer to draft it. They often can write prose to drafting offices, like, I want this to change to this. And then there's a lawyer in central in the drafting office that will do that for them. So what they need is not really the draft, it's the concept as a whole and like the details of it.
Also, just to add on really quickly, like for democracy vouchers, for example, a group here in Pennsylvania contacted me because they're interested in pushing it in the legislative agenda this year at the State House, but they want the actual legislation. We do not have that, but we can connect them to the experts that helped with our kit who have worked on the actual legislation. So when we don't have the legislation or they don't have a legislation, a drafting office, we at least try to connect legislators with the people who've already passed it or with the experts who can help. So try to be that bridge.
So I know that we've kind of touched on this a little bit throughout this whole talk, but do you guys just want to talk like a little bit more about how people can get involved with Deepin and how they can help out, and yeah, like what people can do?
Yes, I would love to. So the bread and the I don't know if it's bread and butter or meat and potatoes. I don't know what the center of gravity of Deepin. I have too many metaphors. Is being a policy organizer that makes a policy kit, or a policy researcher that helps like gather research that will eventually have an organizer make into a kit. And so that's the first thing. If there's an issue that you see on our agenda by clicking through, going to the bottom of the agenda page or clicking through our different framework things, and you want to make, help move towards making a kit on that, please reach out. There's a giant join up button on everywhere throughout the site that is just a simple form that gets you into our system. And we get you going on that, and we'll walk you through a process if you've never done it before, but you're excited. The number one, the major qualities are people who like reading, calling people, writing, and are diligent, basically, and have the fire in the belly to like gather, package, organize, and amplify. And, we have amazing stories from that. Like Michael Brennan was just a grad student now on the Public Bank Institute's board. Tom Latkowski, who made our democracy vouchers kit, he was a UCLA student. Our alternative voting methods was a UCLA college student, and now they're like, you talk to 20 people, you read a bunch of articles, you become like in the top 1% of experts on something enough to write a kit, and we guide you through the whole process. So we'd love people to reach out. We need all the help we can get organizing or researching for kits. If you want to, if you have a legislator you're connected to that you think needs to be turned on to this, or a state leader, reach out and connect us to them. And then the ways, if you don't want to kind of be actively involved, we'd love you to go to our patreon.com/ I sound like a very millennial thing, patreon.com/democracypolicy, and chip in monthly. That helps. Follow us on Substack, democracypolicy.substack.com. Follow us on Twitter, twitter.com/democracypolicy. I don't know, Kyla, what else?
Yeah, so we have just doing research. We have going the distance as a full-on organizer, and writing the kit, donating. But then also if you just have a skill or an interest that you feel could be beneficial, like we just started a podcast. Do you like to do editing for a podcast or like to help with the podcast? You can let us know. Do you want to make graphics? You can let us know. Do you really like editing and want to like sit and copy edit stuff for us? Like we can plug you in many ways if you're not interested in doing research or doing policy organizing. And right now we're just starting our State House network, but as it gets going in the next few months and grows, we're going to need help with maybe reaching out to legislators or just logistics and like combing through data. So really any way you feel like you can contribute or have interests, and whatever your time is like, we can find a place for you.
Yeah, and I just want to attest to the fact that like being a volunteer policy organizer with Deepin has been a super cool, like very empowering experience, honestly, to feel like, oh wow, I can just like kind of, as someone who doesn't really necessarily know as much about this issue, I can just like dive in and learn a lot, and like at the end of a few months of work, write a policy kit that's really hopefully going to be useful to some legislators and actually like maybe get passed in a state. And yeah, I think, yeah, it's a really cool, empowering feeling. So if you have the time, which I will say, It's certainly a bit of a time commitment, but I think it's well worth the impact.
EAs are always looking for projects, and this is a good one.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you, Kyle. Kyle's one of our volunteers as well. Just seeing you here. So great.
Yeah.
I contacted him and I said, hey, I also do grants. And then they said, great. And now I'm doing grants with them. So it's a lot of fun.
So literally anything you can do or are interested in trying to do, let us know, because we're happy to find a place for you. Again, like if there's a topic you're really passionate about, let us know. You know, we want to get as many people involved in this project as possible.
Awesome. Well, I'm gonna give it a second and see if we have any more questions people want to answer before you guys head out.
Yeah, while we're waiting to see if any more questions come in, we didn't really touch on, I saw someone ask like how we train volunteers. And right now we basically, you know, we do an intro, we show you our tools, we'll tell you like our philosophy, you'll have one-on-ones with me and Pete. We have a volunteer handbook that will grow and be updated. We're in the process of making more tools and videos and everything. So when you start, you get a lot of information about kind of how to research or write in our style and our vision. And then a lot of it you do on your own. If you don't want to work alone, we can pair you with a person or group. We have a Slack that you can reach all of our organizers. We break you into smaller groups called policy circles that are supposed to be kind of like a small group support for you. And then Pete has open office hours that you can sign up for to talk through any questions that come up with research or while you're writing. I'm always available. So a lot of it happens on your own time, but we try to give you as many resources to keep you really focused and guided. So if you do become a volunteer, that's how it goes.
Yeah, I think I was actually supposed to say that stuff earlier when I responded to that question and failed to. But thank you, Kyla, for explaining a little more detail about that. And yeah, I definitely felt very like taken care of when I signed up as a volunteer. So yeah, there's a great like kind of onboarding process. So question in the chat, how big is the organization in terms of staff and volunteers?
We have 3 staffers and I would say like maybe 55 volunteers right now.
Yeah.
Of differing levels of engagement. You know, we keep people in different orbits depending on how much they want to do. You know, we have some people slowly giving an hour a week to a kit that'll come out in 6 months. And we have other people that are like, I want to get my kit out this month. And they're working like 20 hours a week on this. So, so it's a range, but those are probably the amount in our Slack and kind of that we're kind of keeping track of now. But
yeah, to be clear, when I said a few months of work, I'm one of those people who's doing like a few hours a week in the slow drizzle. And Pete and Kyla are staff, if that wasn't clear.
We are 2 of the 3. There we go.
Majority of the staff here today.
Awesome. Well, I think that's about it for the evening. But yeah, thank you so much, Pete and Kyla, for coming to speak for us. This was really fantastic, really great to be able to share what you guys are doing. And yeah, there's obviously a bunch of links in the chat, guys. Please check them out if you're interested. I'll also share these on the Facebook and Meetup event afterwards. So if you found us there, you'll be able to check out those links again after.
Thank you so much for having us on, Arushi, and thank you all for coming on a Thursday night. So appreciate talking with you, and please reach out.
Thank you all so much. Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks, Kyla. This is great.
Thank you.